A basement in Conant Gardens, Detroit, late 90s, incense burning, bought at the counter of a record shop called Melodies and Memories. A man in his early 20s standing behind a drum machine with headphones on. Common is on the couch reading a rap magazine, not saying much. He is waiting for one thing. He is waiting for James to nod his head. When the head starts moving, something is coming. The machine is an Akai MPC3000, 16-bit, released in 1994, designed by Roger Lynn. In 1997, it is the most advanced sampler most producers will ever touch. And what it is built to do, above everything else, is fix you. You play a drum pattern with your fingers, badly, the way human fingers play things, and the machine quietly slides every hit onto the nearest point of a grid. That is called quantization. It is the machine's central promise. Play like a person, sound like a clock. Everyone in hip-hop used it. It is why records from that era feel the way they feel. Tight, locked, correct. James DeWitt Yancey is about to spend the next several years fighting it, not by switching it off. That is the version you have heard, and it is wrong, and we will get to why. He is going to take individual sounds, one at a time, and shove them off the grid by amounts so small they barely have names. He called the amounts baby hairs, a kick a hair late, a snare a hair early, and then he is going to repeat those exact errors precisely for the entire length of the song. The result limps. It sounds, to a trained musician in 1997, like a mistake, like a drummer who cannot keep time. 25 years later, his drum machine is in the Smithsonian, and Questlove is telling anyone who will listen that this man turned what one generation called an error into what the next generation knew to be an innovation. That is the story. Hold on to it, because I am going to spend the next hour arguing that it is the single most useful story available to anyone trying to work out whether a film made with generative tools can ever be any good. And I'm going to try very hard not to lie to you about the parts where the comparison falls apart. Part 1. The analogy you are reaching for, here is the intuition, and I think it is basically sound. Music went through this already. Between roughly 1970 and roughly 2005, the entire apparatus of music production went from analog to digital. Tape to hard disk, rooms full of musicians to one person with a sampler. Every stage of that transition arrived with the same funeral notice attached. The soul is going out of it. This is not real music. A machine cannot feel anything. And every stage of that transition produced music that changed the culture. The drum machine did not kill rhythm. Sampling did not kill composition. Pro Tools did not kill performance. What actually happened each time is stranger and more useful. The new tool arrived with a default. The default was efficient, correct, and dead. And then, after a lag of a few years, somebody worked out which specific part of the default to refuse, and that refusal became a language. So the intuition is, the same thing will happen with generative video. The tools arrive, the defaults are dead, the funeral notices go out, and then somebody works out what to refuse. I think that is right. I think it is much more right than the people currently arguing about it on either side realize. But intuitions are not arguments, and the interesting work is in the mechanism. Why did those refusals work? What exactly was being refused? And is the thing available to be refused in a video model the same kind of thing that was available in a drum machine? That last question is where this gets hard, and where I am going to have to disappoint you slightly. But first, we need to be extremely specific about what Dilla actually did, because almost everything you have heard about it is wrong. Part 2, what he actually did. The myth is simple and satisfying, and it goes like this. J Dilla turned off quantization and played from the heart, and his beautiful human imperfection came through, and that is why the music feels alive. Dan Charnas spent 4 years and around 200 interviews establishing that this is not what happened. His book, Dilla Time, is the source for most of what follows, and it is the best book about music production I have read. Here is the actual mechanism. First, the machine mattered. The MPC3000 had a timing resolution of 96 pulses per quarter note. Later machines had 960. That is a factor of 10. What that means in practice is that the 3000's grid was coarse. It could not place a sound just anywhere. the available positions were relatively far apart, and moving a sound one step moved it a noticeable distance, a limitation on paper. Second, and this is the part that kills the myth, he did not simply play unquantized. He used the machine's time shift function to move individual sounds off the grid deliberately in tiny increments, and then he kept those displacements identical across the whole track. Not human wobble, the same wobble, every bar, forever. Charnas's phrase for it is that Dilla's music was an act of calculation as well as feeling, two legitimate kinds of intelligence running at once. Third, the actual innovation. What he built was not swing and it was not straight time. It was both simultaneously in the same bar on different instruments. The kick doing one thing, the hats doing another, the sampled melody doing a third, and the friction between them producing something the existing vocabulary could not describe. Charnas calls it the deliberate juxtaposition of straight and swung time at once, a conscious cultivation of rhythmic friction. Musicians reached for the words they had, swing, groove, pocket, and none of them fit. Dilla's own term for it was better than any of theirs. He called it simple complex. Fourth, and I love this one, he chose his source material for its errors. Charnas shows that Dilla would deliberately pick samples of playing that was already sloppy, already slightly off, and then loop it and slow it down so that the deviation was magnified rather than hidden. He was not adding humanity to a machine, he was hunting for existing human error, amplifying it, and building architecture out of it. Now put those four things together and look at what you have. A man using the most correcting technology available to him at its coarsest resolution to place errors precisely, repeat them exactly, and stack incompatible time fields on top of each other using source material selected specifically because somebody had played it badly. That is not the absence of technique. That is technique of a very high order, aimed at a target nobody had previously thought to aim at. And I want to name the thing he was actually refusing, because it is the whole point of this masterclass. He was not refusing the machine. He loved the machine. He said the 3000 was the best one for what he liked to do. He was refusing the machine's opinion about what correct meant. Part 3. The sentence that should frighten you. Charnas interviewed DJ Jazzy Jeff for the book, and Jeff said something that I think about constantly, and that anyone excited about AI filmmaking should have tattooed somewhere visible. You can follow the method and you won't have the feeling. Sit with that. Because here is the thing about Dilla's technique. It was not secret. It was not proprietary. The MPC3000 was the industry standard machine, sitting in hundreds of studios. The time shift function was in the manual. Anyone could have moved a snare 32 notes early. Anyone could have run a swing setting on one track and not another. There are now, I promise you, several hundred YouTube tutorials that will teach you the Dilla method in 11 minutes. People have reverse engineered his settings. You can buy sample packs of it. There is a whole cottage industry of explaining precisely what he did. And there is still, 20 years after his death at 32, exactly one J Dilla. This is the single most important fact in this entire discussion, so let me put it as plainly as I can. The method was public and reproducible. The result was not, which tells you that the method was never the scarce thing. The scarce thing was the ear, the capacity to hear the difference between an off-grid placement that produces friction and one that produces mush. And that capacity was not built by studying rhythm. It was built by being a specific person in a specific city with a jazz bassist father and an opera singer mother, hearing gospel and Motown and techno bleeding through the same walls, standing in a specific basement burning specific incense, watching a friend on a couch to see whether his head moved. I've been arguing for a while now that specificity is the last uncopyable asset. That competence has become free and therefore stopped functioning as a filter. Jazzy Jeff said the same thing in 11 words about a producer who died in 2006. And he said it about a technology that everybody had. Hold that thought. We are going to need it in about 10 minutes. Part 4, where the analogy breaks. Now, I have to be honest with you because a masterclass that only tells you flattering things is a sales pitch. There is a real disanalogy between the MPC and a generative video model, and it is not a small one. If we skate over it, everything I say afterwards is worthless. The MPC3000 did not propose anything. It sat there. It did nothing until James put his hands on it. It had no opinion about what a good drum pattern was. It had a default behavior, quantization, which was a correction applied after the fact to something a human had already originated. The content came from him. The machine tidied it. A generative video model is not like that at all. It proposes. You type a sentence and it returns a fully realized image with a lighting scheme, a lens choice, a color palette, a composition, a performance, a piece of production design, and a weather condition, none of which you specified and all of which came from somewhere else. The origination is happening inside the machine. That is a genuinely different relationship, and anyone telling you it is just a new brush is either not paying attention or selling something. Here is why it matters in the terms we have been using. Dilla's raw material was sound he had chosen from records he had hunted for in shops, plus rhythm that came out of his own hands. His errors were his errors. When he moved a kick a baby hair late, that displacement originated with him and expressed something about how he heard time. When a model gives you a shot, the shot's properties originate in a statistical distribution built from millions of other people's images. The center of that distribution is, by construction, the average of everything that has been done. The default output of a generative model is not neutral the way silence is neutral. It is opinionated in a very particular direction, toward the baby hairs, most likely thing, and the most likely thing is precisely the thing an audience's prediction system discards without ever surfacing it to awareness. It is wallpaper by design, not because the technology is bad, but because that is what the technology is for. So the honest version of the problem is this. Dilla was fighting a machine that corrected him. You are working with a machine that suggests to you. Correction leaves your fingerprint intact underneath and merely smooths it. Suggestion can replace your fingerprint before you have noticed you had one. That is a harder problem, and I do not want to pretend otherwise. Part 5, what survives the break? But look at what actually carries across, because it is more than you would expect. In both cases, there is a grid. In both cases, the grid represents the tool's opinion about correctness. In both cases, the artistically interesting position is off it. And in both cases, the entire skill consists of two things: knowing which direction to move and being able to perceive that you have moved. The grid has just changed shape. In the MPC, the grid was time. 16th notes, correct meant on the beat. In a generative model, the grid is the center of the distribution. Correct means likely, the most probable lighting, the most probable framing for that description, the most probable face for that phrase, the most probable way a body moves when a sentence says it moves. Quantization in a drum machine snaps your timing to the nearest grid line. The equivalent operation in a generative model snaps every unspecified property of your image to the nearest cultural cliche. It is the same operation. It is running on far more dimensions, and it is invisible because there is no visible grid to see your kick sitting off, which means the Dilla move translates, and it translates almost exactly. Find the property that matters. Push it off center by a specific and deliberate amount. Repeat that displacement consistently so it reads as a decision rather than a glitch, and retain the ability to tell the difference between friction and mush. Let me also give you the second Dilla move because it is the one nobody talks about and it is more directly usable. Remember that he selected samples that were already played badly, then slowed them down to exaggerate the error. He went hunting for existing human deviation and built architecture on top of it. The equivalent is not hard to see. You bring in material that has a body's error already in it, real location sound, a face that was actually in a room, a performance recorded by a person who was tired that day, a texture photographed rather than described, and then you use the generative layer for what it is genuinely excellent at, which is the predictable middle, and you let the real material carry the load. That is not a compromise position. That is the actual Dilla Dilla method transposed. He did not synthesize his drums. He stole them from records where somebody had played them slightly wrong. Part 6. The moves. So, concretely, if you are making something with these tools and you want it to be worth a stranger's evening, here is what I think follows. 1. Decide what the load-bearing material is and refuse to generate it. Every piece has a small number of elements doing work nothing else can do. The test is removal. Take it out, and if what changes is what the audience knows, it was ornamental, and if what changes is what the audience feels, it was load-bearing. Generate ornament freely, establishing geography, a sky, a crowd, a car passing, an interior nobody will look at twice. That is the competent layer that distribution demands, and there is no virtue in shooting it expensively. Then take your load-bearing elements and make them out of something that happened. Because a load-bearing element made from the center of a distribution is, by definition, the thing every prediction engine in the audience will discard first. 2. Push one property hard and keep it pushed. Pick a dimension, color, duration, focal length, frame rate, where the camera sits relative to the eyeline. Move it a long way off the model's default and hold it there across the whole piece. This is the baby hairs move, and the second half of it is the half people skip. Dilla's displacements were not random. They were identical every bar. That consistency is what converted them from errors into a style. One weird shot is a mistake. The same weirdness for 90 minutes is a voice. 3. Work at the coarse resolution deliberately. Dilla's machine had 1/10 of the timing resolution of the machines that came after, and the limitation was load-bearing to the sound. The grain of the tool was audible in the result, and it was not hidden. There is a real temptation with generative work to sand everything until the seams disappear. Resist it selectively. If the tool has a texture, decide whether that texture is doing work. Sometimes the visible grain is the only thing telling the audience a decision was made. 4. Steal error from the world. Hunt for material that has a body's deviation already in it and amplify it rather than correcting it. The room tone that has a fridge in it. The take where the actor's timing was wrong in an interesting way. The handheld drift. The lens that was never good. The models are trained on the aggregate, which means the aggregate is what they return. Anything with a real error in it is, by definition, off the center of the distribution. And that is where all the information lives. 5. Declare. I have argued elsewhere that audiences run a defense which is extremely fast at detecting the shape of persuasion and extremely poor at the question underneath it. It fires on anything that looks like it is hiding something. And once it fires, everything you made gets reread as evidence about you rather than as itself, which means the worst available strategy with these tools is to use them and hope nobody notices. That is camouflage. Camouflage has a half-life, detection is permanent, and the conclusion the audience reaches when they catch you is never that ad was an ad. It is that person hides. In June 2026, the Tribeca Festival premiered Dreams of Violets, a fully AI-generated film by Ash and Puya Kusha, dramatizing the killing of Iranian civilians during a communications blackout built from journalistic reports, photographs, and eyewitness accounts because nobody could get a camera in. The director's statement about it includes a sentence I would frame if I were you. He wrote that he is not certain this is the right form for the story, but that he is certain the story needed a form, and this was the form available to him. That is declaration executed perfectly. It concedes the doubt before anyone can use it against him. It states the reason. It leaves the audience with only one question left to ask, which is this worth my time? That is the only question in this landscape that rewards being good. Part 7, the truthfulness problem. Now, the harder half of that, because declaration is not a magic word and it does not settle everything. There is a genuine ethical dispute running through this, and I am not going to pretend it away. Justine Bateman founded a non-AI film festival, Credo 23, explicitly in response to Tribeca's 2024 partnership with OpenAI, on the grounds that these models are built on the work of filmmakers past and present who were never asked. That objection does not dissolve because the outputs got better. It is a claim about provenance, and it is a serious one, and the number of festivals accepting this work has gone from a handful to several dozen in about 2 years without the claim having been resolved. I am not going to tell you how to weigh that. I will tell you that pretending it is not there is the camouflage move again, and it will cost you later. But there is a second question underneath the ethical one, and it is the one that actually decides whether any of this work is any good. It is the question of whether a generated image can be truthful. Here is where I have landed, and you are free to disagree. disagree. The thing that makes a specific detail work on an audience is not that it is real, it is that it is correct in a way that could only have been arrived at by attention. When a detail is right, some part of a viewer's nervous system that has stood in a room like that recognizes it and stops arguing. That recognition is doing the work, and it does not have a fact checker attached, which means the question is not, did a camera see this? The question is, did anybody notice this? Was there a moment where a human being with a body was paying attention to the world and registered something specific? And is that specific thing now in the frame? A generated image can carry that if the noticing happened somewhere in the chain. If the person making it knew from having been there that the light in a Dutch stairwell at 4 in the afternoon in November is a particular kind of gray and pushed until they got that gray rather than the model's idea of gray, the noticing is real, the photons are not. And I think the noticing is the load-bearing part. What a generated image cannot carry is a detail nobody noticed. And that is what you get by default every single time, because the default is the average, and the average is made of everything nobody looked at twice. So the honest answer to, can an AI film ever be as good as a good traditional film is? Yes, and only under a condition that is much harder to meet than the technology is to operate. Somebody has to have been somewhere, paid attention, and be able to tell when the machine has given them the average instead of the thing they noticed. That is the ear, and the ear is the scarce thing. It always was. Close. The basement back to Conant Gardens. Nothing about that basement was optimal. The machine was worse than the machines that came after it. The room was somebody's mother's house. He did not have a formal music education. He was working inside a technology whose entire design philosophy was that people like him should be corrected. He died at 32 of lupus and a rare blood disease. He had maybe 12 working years. In that time, he changed how professional musicians, human ones with hands, understand time. Charnas argues he is the only producer to come out of hip-hop or electronic music and fundamentally alter how traditionally trained musicians play. His drum machine is in a national museum, and every tutorial explaining exactly how he did it is free, and none of them work. You are going to be told over the next few years that the tools are the story, that whoever has access to the best model wins. That is the same thing people said about the MPC3000 in 1994, and everybody had one, and it did not turn out to be true. The tools will get better and they will get cheaper, and by the end of the decade, the difference in raw capability between what you can access and what a studio can access will be close to nothing. That is not the good news, it sounds like. When everyone has the machine stops being the answer to anything. What is left is the part that was always left, whether you have been anywhere, whether you noticed anything while you were there, whether you can tell when the machine hands you something beautiful and average that it is average. Move it off the grid by a specific amount, on purpose, every bar, and watch the room to see if anybody's head moves.